the NHS. Everyone in my constituency of Surrey Heath wants a new Frimley Park hospital, but the chosen site, the last remaining fragment of the ancient Frimley Common, is wholly inappropriate. It's inaccessible, behind multiple schools, and environmentally devastating. But worse, over recent weeks, I've received deeply troubling evidence that the preferred relocation site was known and being openly discussed by local political figures in 2023 before the official site selection process had even begun. The entirely reasonable conclusion, Mr. Speaker, is that this project has been compromised from the outset and the site predetermined. I think the Prime Minister would agree that this is no way to begin a multi-billion-pound public procurement process. So would the Prime Minister please step in? Would the Prime Minister please step in, commission an urgent independent review?
I think the Prime Minister's got the question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, his NHS Trust has identified their preferred site for the new Frimley Park Hospital, and detailed technical work can now start. And let's be frank about this hospital. The Tories promised 40 new hospitals with no funding and no delivery plan, and we've had to fix that. His hospital, thanks to Labour investment, is at the front of the queue. It will be one of the first in the country to be rebuilt. But his approach, Mr. Speaker, has been, on the one hand, to demand a new hospital and then oppose actually building it. He's urged his constituents to oppose it because, quote, this is his quote, if the hospital goes ahead, there will be no golf course. So, Labour building new hospitals, he's standing up for golf courses. I can't think of anything more Lib Dem.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A good, safe and secure home is the foundation of everything, and access to a council home at social rent continues to be the biggest issue that my Luton South and South Bedfordshire constituents get in touch with me about. But under this Labour government, in 24-25, councils delivered the highest annual number of social and affordable homes since 1991-92. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we must build on this achievement and accelerate progress on council house building to ensure we deliver the biggest council housing programme since the post-war era?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud that this government is delivering the biggest boost to social and affordable housing in a generation. Backed by £39 billion, it means we're unleashing the biggest surge in council house building in over 30 years, and that includes 1,000 new sociable and affordable homes in Luton and Bedfordshire. And our social housing bill will reform Right to Buy to deliver even more social houses. A Labour government delivering the homes that we need.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself and this side of the House with the Prime Minister's comments about Venezuela and also about the Lib Dems? Mr. Speaker. But seriously, Mr. Speaker, the Chief of Defence Staff made it known that the armed forces needed a minimum of £28 billion more to defend the country. Can the Prime Minister tell us why he thinks half that amount is enough?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that this Labour government has delivered 2 major funding increases in just 2 years in government. The first, which was funded by overseas aid, took us to £270 billion over the spending review period. Mr. Speaker, that is a record. The Defence Investment Plan gives us capability we need for the future. That sets a new record, Mr. Speaker, of £300 billion over the next 4 years. That will be invested in drones and autonomous weapons, the largest ever investment, strengthening the UK's nuclear capability, upgrading our naval bases in the most significant way for 45 years, and confirming our commitment to the next generation of fighter jets. That is what is needed to keep our country safe.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't say that it was enough, and that was a very long list of things that he's not yet paying for. It is not right and it is not fair, certainly not to our troops who put their lives on the line for all of us every single day. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, 3 weeks ago, the Defence Secretary resigned, saying, I am being forced to make decisions that would increase the risk to personnel on operations and could make the country less safe. Since that letter, the Prime Minister has only increased spending by 0.01%. We can count, the generals can count, the Kremlin can count. His plan doesn't add up. How can the Prime Minister possibly stand there and say that this is enough?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is the most significant upgrade in defence spending since the 1980s. The Chief of Defence Staff has been clear that the plan accelerates the transformation we need for our armed forces. The First Sea Lord, it funds the capability we need to fight and win. The Chief Air Staff strengthens our contribution to NATO, and she must have missed that yesterday the Secretary-General of NATO welcomed the plan. All people who know what's in the plan and welcome it. Contrast that, Mr. Speaker, with their record in government, because they hollowed out the armed forces. Their record is cutting defence spending. My record is raising it to £300 billion and rising. Their record is cutting frigates by a quarter, cutting mine hunters by a half, and leaving 47 of 49 defence programmes delayed or over budget. My record is the biggest boost to defence investment since the 1980s. Their record is missing army recruitment targets every year for 14 years. We've given our armed force the biggest pay rise for 20 years and increased defence funding by £15 billion a year. That's a record I'm proud to stand on.
Mr. Speaker, the Chief of Defence Staff is an honourable man, and what he and the NATO Secretary-General have done is welcome the fact that a plan has been published. Just that it's been published. They've been waiting for over a year. Strategic Defence Review was last year. He is an honourable man, Mr. Speaker, who is having to make do with very little. The threat level has dramatically changed in the 2 years that the Prime Minister has been in office. Poland, since the Prime Minister took office, Poland has increased their funding to 4.8%. Germany has increased theirs to 3.7%. This year, Russia will spend 10% of GDP on defence. Meanwhile, Britain is spending it all on welfare. Even the limited plan that he has announced has completely unravelled because he hasn't found the money to pay for it. It is £5 billion short. We all know that he is leaving this to his successor, so can he confirm that the member for Makerfield has agreed to fund the shortfall?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what they did was to cut defence spending. When they came into power, defence spending was 2.5%. What did they do? They cut it to 2.3%, a cut. But on welfare, what did they do? They put it up by £88 billion. So we'll take no lectures from them about either welfare or defence. This is £15 billion of new investment for defence, delivered outside of a budget, outside of a spending review. Mr. Speaker, that's about £1 billion a year over 4 years. Because of the decisions at the last budget, we've got headroom of £22 billion. That is precisely so we can take decisions like this. We delivered it outside a budget, outside a spending review. Just like we did with the special educational needs, outside a budget, outside a spending review. Just like the previous government did, Mr. Speaker, when they announced their 5-year NHS plan in 2018, outside a budget, outside a spending review. And what did they say when they were challenged about it, Mr. Speaker? I'll quote, "We will be able to explain exactly where every penny is coming from, but we will do that in the budget." That was the former Health Secretary, then the Chancellor. When they published their Integrated Defence Review in 2020, what did they do? They set out the funding at the next spending review. So let's drop the faux outrage, focus on what matters, the biggest sustained increase for 40 years, the biggest increase for 45 years, providing what is needed to keep the country safe.
Mr. Speaker, he says that he's delivering this outside the budget. That's right. It should have been in the last budget. The Strategic Defence Review was published last year. It should have been in the last budget, not the next budget. The intelligence assessment that he himself has said we have says there could be an attack on NATO by 2030. But this plan doesn't deliver until after that. £5 billion is missing from his plan. It also relies on £11 billion of unidentified savings. The plan has unravelled. It is a total dereliction of duty, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. The Times newspaper said today the Prime Minister's legacy... why don't we wait and see what they said? That the Prime Minister's legacy is betrayal, failure and vulnerability, and that's one of the nicer headlines. So I will ask again, because he didn't answer the question, Mr. Speaker, did the member for Makerfield know that he was going to have to find £5 billion for the Prime Minister's plan?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when I became Prime Minister 2 years ago, this country spent £54 billion a year on defence. Because of the decisions we've taken, that will rise to £80 billion a year by 2029. That is a real terms increase of 27%, transforming our armed forces. And we're not going to take any lectures from the party opposite. They cut defence spending. They hollowed out the armed forces. That's what their Defence Secretary admitted that's what they did. They don't like it. They won't defend their record, Mr. Speaker, because they can't. They won't apologise for it, because they have to admit what we all know is a total failure. They just try to pretend the 14 years they were in power never really happened. We're in power, we're recording investment in defence and security. I'm proud of this Labour government, and any Labour Prime Minister would stand behind this plan.
It doesn't sound like he's told the member for Makerfield to find £5 billion. He says any Labour Prime Minister would stand behind this plan. Let me tell him what Lord Richard Dannett, the former head of the Army, said yesterday. He said the Prime Minister had chosen the cheap option and called the plan woefully inadequate. Let me tell him what General Sir Richard Barrons, one of the authors of his own Strategic Defence Review, said yesterday. We are simply not going to be ready to defend this country properly. That's what they're saying. The reason that he is in this mess is because he was too weak to cut welfare when he had the chance. There are only three ways, Mr. Speaker, to find the missing £5 billion. Increase borrowing, increase taxes, or cut welfare. Which one will he recommend to the member for Makerfield?
Mr. Speaker, we're talking about £1 billion a year over 4 years. The decisions at the last budget gave us more than £22 billion in headroom, so we can take the decisions that they don't understand this because they trashed the old. We built a headroom of £22 billion. The very reason for the headroom is to have the credibility to take decisions outside the budget and outside the spending review. They don't understand it because they lost control of the public finances. In addition to more on defence and security, we've taken control of the public finances. That's why you have headroom to take credible decisions like this. £1 billion a year over 4 years, headroom of £22 billion because of the decisions we took at the last budget, which allow us to take these decisions.
Mr. Speaker, we understand it perfectly, and that's why, yes we do, that's why he is leaving and so is his Chancellor. They're laughing and pretending, but if he was doing such a fabulous job, why did he resign? Mr. Speaker, defence of the realm is the first duty of government. Yes, it is the first duty of government. I don't need to read again what General Sir Richard Barrons or Lord Richard Dannett said. Maybe they didn't hear it the first time. They can re-watch the clips. But defence of the realm, Mr. Speaker, is the first duty of government. Britain is facing a moment of danger unlike anything in our lifetimes, unlike anything that we saw even in government. We need a plan to fund our armed forces that meets this moment. They are the government for now, not for 10 years ago. And the fact is, Labour's plan is too weak, it is too little, and it is too late. If his successor doesn't want to be complicit in this failure, he should come out and condemn this plan. The money must be found, Mr. Speaker, and that money should come from cutting welfare, something these Labour MPs will not do. And if the Labour Party cannot defend our country, Mr. Speaker, what is the point of them?
It's just all talk. What did they actually do? They cut defence 2.5% down to 2.3% in their 14 long years. And what have you done welfare? They put the bill up by £88 billion. So no lectures from them. They failed in the first duty of government. And they won't defend their record, will they? They won't stand here and defend it because they know never do they stand here and defend their record because they can't. 14 years of failure. They don't get up and apologise, which is what they should do, because they would admit what we all know how much they failed. So they just sit there pretending it didn't happen. Well, it did happen. You hollowed out the armed forces. We're correcting you. And I tell you what else, when we came into power, public services were on their knees. Today, we've seen the fastest fall in NHS waiting lists for 17 years. When I became Prime Minister, we inherited a broken economy. Today, we're outperforming the other G7 economies. When I became Prime Minister, our international alliances have been shredded. Now other countries are looking to us to lead on defence and security. Foundations of a stronger and fairer country. Britain in a better state than we found it. That's the difference a Labour government makes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Two of my constituents, Cody and Liam Townend, and another mum from Leeds, Zoe Ward, all lost babies in different tragic circumstances. But they all went to the same funeral director who did not treat their babies' bodies with the dignity, care or respect that they deserved. I will not repeat the shocking details here. The BBC, for their part, published what they could last year. But more shockingly still, the police found nothing actionable in either case because there is no regulation of the funeral industry, and the individual in question is still operating in Leeds today. Given that the Department of Health and Social Care are due to make a decision about changing the law in this area, possibly before he leaves office, will the Prime Minister speak with ministers and officials in that department to ensure that when they consider the question of whether to regulate the funeral industry, their answer is yes?
Can I thank him for raising this case and thank him? He's been a committed campaigner on this. I have seen the details of the particular case. He's right not to repeat them in this chamber. They are horrifying. The lack of dignity and compassion is unacceptable, and I simply can't imagine the pain that Cody, Liam and Zoe experienced and are still experiencing. The status quo here is not working for families, and people deserve to know that their loved ones are treated with dignity and compassion. We are going to consider this closely, and I thank him for raising it. I do want stronger standards and oversight. I think that's absolutely needed, particularly in light of appalling cases like this.
Sir Ed David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I not associate myself with the Prime Minister's comments about my party? But can I associate myself with all his remarks about the earthquake and humanitarian catastrophe in Venezuela? And can I commend the Scottish team and the Scottish fans on the joy they brought to the World Cup? They did the whole of Scotland proud. And can I wish England well against DR Congo later today? But with Rhys James and Gerald Quansah in doubt, I know the Prime Minister isn't the only one struggling for a solid defence plan. Mr. Speaker, the wars in Ukraine and Iran show us how seriously we must take the threat of missiles and drones hitting our country. Our national security requires the best possible missile defence system, including Royal Navy destroyers. But the funding in his plan for this falls dangerously short. Yet the Prime Minister has rejected our proposals for defence bonds, which were used in the past to rearm our country. So can the Prime Minister tell us why has he chosen to leave our country so vulnerable to missile attack?
Prime Minister.
Can I first join him on his comments about the Scotland team and Scotland fans and wish England well? I'm not sure about his gag. He was getting a bit better the other week, but he's gone back down. I'm afraid that one is a red card. But, Mr. Speaker, our defence investment plan gives our country what we need to fight now and into the future, the capability that's been assessed through the strategic review. Bonds, which we looked at very closely, are simply borrowing by another name, and we are already borrowing in a way which requires us to spend £1 in every 10 on servicing the interest on that. And I would gently point out, before he carries on with any criticism of our plan, that he sat in a cabinet that cut defence spending by 22%.
Sir Ed Davey.
The Prime Minister knows that our defence bonds are within his own fiscal rules, that he's had advice from his own team that he should adopt them, and I hope the Right Honourable Member for Makerfield will listen. But, Mr. Speaker, I have another concern I think the Prime Minister will share. The rising tide of racist violence and hate that we're seeing in our country, and the way it's being incited and normalised, including, I'm afraid, by some members of this House. I was talking to a British friend of Indian ancestry who told me how reform activists came to her door and said that if they get into power, she and her family will have their passports seized and their citizenship revoked. Does the Prime Minister agree that racism has no place in our country? And will he join me in condemning anyone who is stoking it?
Can I thank him for raising this? It is really important because our politics is becoming more diverse and racism and intolerance is permeating everywhere. And we have to deal with it because it's tearing our societies apart. It is keeping good people away from politics because they don't want to be involved in it. And it should be called out by every single person who's a politician at any level in this country. But, Mr. Speaker, I say this looking at the plaque to Joe Cox, and of course we've got David Amos behind me too. We had a Joe Cox 10-year reminder that it was 10 years ago, just a week or so ago, that we lost Joe, and I had a reception in Downing Street with her parents and other close friends and relatives of hers. We read out the words of Joe again. The very sad thing is, I was not able to say that in the 10 years since Joe's death, things have got better, because sadly, they've got worse. That's on us to fix, all of us to fix, every single member of this House, whatever their party in, and anybody who flames it should be absolutely ashamed of themselves.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate myself with the comments of the Prime Minister about the legacy of Joe Cox? I know all of us in this place have been following the contest for number 10 quite closely in recent weeks, but amid the North versus South debate, I think it's about time we had someone from the Midlands who was ready to step into this important position for our country. So I'm delighted to say we have two fantastic Black Country lads, Jude Bellingham from Stourbridge and Morgan Rogers from Halesowen, who have both been doing us proud in the contested England number 10 role against our game for Congo this evening. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we should congratulate England on their progress out of the group stage so far? And does he also agree with me that we need to do more to support
Prime Minister? Well, I thought the next few weeks were about to get quite interesting, Mr. Speaker, but can I... Look, we do all wish England the best of luck this evening, and every time those players step on the pitch, they represent the talent, ambition and diversity of this country. We're proud to be supporting the next generation, investing £400 million into grassroots facilities and over £1 billion in school sports. And if Thomas Tuchel needs any advice on penalties, he should ask David Seaman, who slotted one past him just a few weeks ago.
Dave Dougal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am gravely concerned. I am gravely concerned that time after time, this Prime Minister, in response to the abject and honest criticism of his defence investment plan, he cites recent trends in defence spending when he should be calibrating it against the chronic and very real threat that the people on these islands face. In his limited time left in number 10, will he get a grip of his paper-thin plan?
Prime Minister.
This is the party that thinks we should give up the nuclear deterrent. And he stands there to talk about defence. So we need no more advice and sanctimonious nonsense from the NSP. Before he or any of them give any more advice to me or this House, let's have some home truths. Their chief executive has just been jailed for 5 years for embezzlement. They're all pretending they didn't know anything about it. They couldn't even see the motorhome parked in the driveway, apparently. And now they're blocking inquiry into the Scottish Parliament. Before they offer any more advice, they should look in the mirror.
Well, there is Prime Minister's questions, and before we get to discussing it with our panel here in the studio in Westminster, let's go straight to Westminster Hall, where our political correspondent Catherine Forster has been watching Prime Minister's questions, not just inside Parliament. You can see Westminster Hall behind you, Catherine, but you are out there on College Green. What did you make of today's back and forth?
Well, all about defence, wasn't it? Which I think was entirely predictable, given that delayed defence investment plan was finally published yesterday, and just £1.5 billion extra to get to that £15 billion extra. Over what Defence Secretary John Healey and Armed Forces Minister Al Khan's resigned over just 3 weeks ago, saying it wasn't enough to keep the country safe. So Kemi Badenoch picking up on that, and the Prime Minister really having none of it. Him going, look, you guys hollowed out the armed forces for year after year after year. We've taken defence spending to record levels, 300 billion over the next 4 years. But Kemi Badenoch's argument is, yeah, but the world has changed. She said Britain is facing a moment of danger unlike that any in our lifetimes. And I think part of the problem is not just what defence chiefs are saying. They'd asked for 28 billion at a minimum. They've got just over half of that. But also what other NATO allies are spending. She quoted a few stats, Poland on 4.8%, and Russia, strikingly, spending 10% of GDP on warfare, and we've had those warnings that Russia could attack a NATO ally as soon as 2030, and warnings from military bosses that this plan will simply not make us ready. Kemi Badenoch just accused the Prime Minister of a total dereliction of duty, and also she wanted to know whether the guy that's going to be taking over as PM in a couple of weeks' time, Andy Burnham, knew about the fact that 5 billion of this 15 billion hasn't actually yet been found. It is TBC in a coming budget. She asked repeatedly on that. The Prime Minister batted that question away. And then, of course, she made the link with welfare, because that £5 billion, well, this time last year, the Prime Minister couldn't get £5 billion of welfare cuts through his own backbench MPs who were having none of it. So Kemi Badenoch's argument is this is a Labour Party which will prioritise welfare spending over keeping us safe for a future war, and that, of course, is an issue that Andy Burnham is going to have to deal with very, very soon indeed, because all these problems are shortly going to become his.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine Forster, for that analysis. We're joined in the studio by the Labour MP for Mansfield, Steve Yem, and the Conservative MP for Wetherby and Easingwold, Alec Shelbrooke. And you've been sending your brilliant questions to us. Keep them coming. I'm going to start with Labour's Steve Yem. There's quite a few questions on this theme. So Jazz says, this is why Starmer has to go, blaming past governments instead of taking responsibility for what he chose to do. Alan P sort of has a joke, but he's making a serious point. If England lose tonight, will, as usual, Labour blame it on 14 years of Tory rule. And the point many of our viewers and listeners are making is that this is supposed to be about answers. The Defence Investment Plan is not properly funded, and people want answers, not for him to blame others.
Certainly,
Steve,
certainly, I understand that. And look, there is always a balance to be struck between what we inherited 2 years ago, actually rather large cuts in defence under the Tories, and the changing times that call for us to do a lot more. So, look, we have been in government for 2 years. I think we need to reflect on that. It's not all about blaming the Conservatives. But look, on your specific point on the the £4.5 billion gap, let's get that into perspective, right? It's £4 billion over 4 years. It's £1 billion a year. For context, £700 billion the government spends. This is £1 billion. It's not unusual for governments to make an announcement and then to say, we'll say how we're going to fund it in the next fiscal event. Governments do that a lot. Governments of all colours. This government has already done it several times. I think that there's some emphasis on this at this point in time because there's a change in Prime Minister, but nothing out the ordinary.
do you agree with Kemi Badenoch's point that if you cut the welfare bill, then you've got the money? The missing billions is there. Are Labour MPs up for it? She says this won't happen because of you lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I was very much in favour of reforming welfare when we tried to do that last year. I think we have to have another run-up at doing that. I'm very much in favour of that. But again, let's have some context. If you take pensions out of the equation, benefits are stuck at around 5% of GDP right over the Parliament. This idea that it's growing rapidly is not the case when you compare it to GDP. And look, we're only going to cut the benefits bill when we get more people back into work.
1,000 people a day are signing on to personal independence payments. Yeah. That's an extraordinary growth in disability benefits.
It is. And it is a problem, and we need to get more people back into work, and that's the way to tackle that, I think. And look, if we could get the employment rate amongst working-age people up from 75% to 80%, it's been a goal of various governments, then we're able to cut £10 billion a year off universal credit cost. And I think that's the way that we really need to tackle this. We need to really have a relentless emphasis on worklessness and getting people back into work.
Alex Shelbrooke, this is what the Conservatives have been saying for some time, that there do need to be welfare cuts, but of course, time and time again, we've seen people make the argument and Parliament refuse to back them.
So I think, it's pleasing to hear what Steve's saying about, he would back those reforms. And let's not forget that the problem that Andy Burnham's going to face is that there are still the same MPs on the backbenches who blocked it last time. And that initial plan was to cut it by £5 billion, and that was chucked out. And that would cover this cost that's coming forward. As you rightly point out, it's 1,000 people a day going onto PIP, but the reasons that people are going to PIP about anxiety and things like this, I think most people call that just becoming an adult and the pressures that we have in our lives when you've got all these other pressures in your life.
And we see a disproportionate number of young people going on.
So that was what I was talking about, was these 18 to 25-year-olds. I don't know where at the point in society it shifted to people were taking that option, but it is wrong and it's got to be stopped. And therein starts to lie some of the things, because if you are talking about anxiety and what could happen, I'm the Vice President of the NATO PA. The threats to this country are enormous. And people can see things, but they can't see things. So when there was the attack, the cyber attack on M&S, people saw the empty shelves. But they didn't see it because they just went to another supermarket. Now imagine all supermarkets getting hit with that cyber attack. People can see, but they can't see what the real dangers are.
That cyber attack on some of our supermarkets was from a hostile foreign state?
It almost certainly was. There's two aspects that it can come from. What we've analysed on the NATO PA is that there's a lot of subcontracting now, maybe 5 times down the row, and getting criminal gangs to do it. So it then becomes very hard to pin it back to Moscow or wherever. Or you get freelancers trying to advertise what they can do. But whichever whichever way you look at it, they're hostile acts which are either trying to advertise to a hostile state or being instructed by a hostile state. And the NATO moved to two more domains out of air, sea and land. It also went to cyber and space. So these are Article 5 triggers, but as you'll be well aware, how do you trigger Article 5 on a cyber attack when you don't know where it's come from?
Shall we move back to what Kemi was saying at the start of this back and forth in Prime Minister's Questions? Because Bob Bobbins, now that might not be your real name, but thank you for writing it anyway, Bob Bobbins. He said Kemi lost this argument from the start. All Keir is doing is directing back to 14 years of disaster. And it's true to say that under the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, in 2010 spending was 2.5% of GDP. By 2024, it was 2.3%.
Yeah, absolutely. And different times. And, you know, defence spending was cut, government by government, from 1989. The only time it went up was when we were at wars like Iraq and going into Afghanistan. And there's plenty of Labour MPs will stare at their feet over the Iraq war. And you know, remember when we went into that war initially in 2003, the army weren't equipped in the way they needed to be equipped. But the post-Cold War dividend, as it was called, went on and on. When the invasion of Ukraine happened in 2022, our government said, we got to spend more money. Where I'm disappointed, that money across Europe and the NATO allies in Europe should have started when they walked into Crimea in 2014. That was when it was obvious what was going to happen. That's where the lag was. And you do have to now invest. But as Kemi said, the world's changed, and it has changed significantly.
I'm going to bring in another question, but I know you've been...
Well, look, I am pleased to hear that you accept, Alec, that actually...
Can't argue with numbers, can you?
On that invasion of Crimea, I think that was a turning point 10 years before Labour came into government. And, you know, it's good to hear you reflect on that.
And it's the whole NATO alliance.
And realise this was a failure of the past Conservative government that left us, you know, precisely where we were in 2024.
In the stand to world realities. It's happened across the NATO alliance. But when the full invasion of Ukraine came, the money invested by the last government shot up as well. That post-Cold War dividend happened in February 22.
Let me bring Jan in, who has submitted this question, because, of course, things are changing in this country. We are going to have a new Prime Minister. Jan simply asks, why is Burnham not being challenged for the leadership? What legitimacy will he have? You go to bed one night and Keir Starmer's the Prime Minister, you wake up the next day, Andy Burnham's the Prime Minister. It doesn't feel right.
Well, look, we don't have a presidential system in this country. We have a parliamentary system, and just like happened twice under the last Conservative government, we had a change of Prime Minister without a general election. We have something very similar going on right now, and a majority of Labour MPs think that we should have a change of leader. And, you know, I think that's the very simple reason why, if you like.
And should there be a general election? I'm going to quote to you something that Angela Rayner said when the last Tory government crowned Rishi Sunak. Quotes, without him saying a word about what he would do as Prime Minister, no mandate, no answers, no ideas, nobody voted for this. The public deserve their say on Britain's future through a general election. It's time for a fresh start with Labour. I mean, I could quote loads of people who called for a general election when the last lot changed leaders.
Indeed. I'm pleased that I didn't at the time. That's a relief.
Slightly awkward for Andy Burnham, though, who did.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, it would be awkward for anyone who did. I didn't, and I don't believe that there should be a general election because we have a parliamentary system. And, of course, there'll be a general election in due course, but I don't think now is the right time for that.
And because you were elected on a manifesto, and that manifesto was clear, and that's what you have a mandate for, Andy Burnham can't be that much of a different Prime Minister, can he, apart from different vibes, because that's the only mandate you have from the British people?
Well, indeed. Look, we don't... It's not just that manifesto, but we had a King's Speech a few weeks back, and we laid out all of the parliamentary business and new acts and so forth for the parliamentary session. And so, you know, of course, a new leader and a new Prime Minister will have a perspective on that. They, you know, will want to change things in some respects, but I hope and I expect that we'll carry on governing in light of that manifesto in 2024 and the King's Speech that we had just a few weeks ago.
Now, Alec, Brian has written in to say, I've voted Conservative all my long life, but do I want Andy Burnham to fail Of course not. That would be stupid. And I was struck by this because we were having a conversation before the programme started where you were saying you believed something quite similar.
Yeah, I do. Look, if you don't come into politics to serve your country and want your country to improve, get out. And the last 2 years, this government has been an unmitigated disaster. So with this change in leadership, with the change in Prime Minister, I want it to improve. I think Rachel Reeves has been an enormous disaster. I want a Chancellor who's going to come in and make things improve. You know, you have to look at what's best for the country. Now, I still think politically we can go into an election, we can make the argument, we can beat Labour at the next election. That's the politics about what you offer at that time. But I do not want to see this country carry on the way it's been coming. So I actually wish goodwill to Andy Burnham to try and make things improve, because we cannot carry on the way it's been going.
Well, still ahead, we'll be hearing more from our political panel, getting more from you. That's all about your questions on this show. Stay with us.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A fine day by and large today. There will be some wet weather coming into western Scotland, the west of Northern Ireland later on. Temperatures about average for most places, but quite warm across the southeast. High pressure edging in from the south, but low pressure also pushing in across the north, and that will bring the rain, just patchy rain initially, spreading its way into Northern Ireland, then into the west coast of Scotland. 1 or 2 showers possible ahead of that, particularly across Scotland. The odd shower elsewhere is just about possible, especially for East Anglia, but most of England and Wales dry with a mixture of cloudy skies and some sunshine. And when the sun's out, temperatures getting up to 25, 26 across the southeast. Otherwise, fairly close to average for the time of year. There's the rain edging its way in further north, but generally staying fine. A pretty good evening. The cloud melting away further this evening over South Wales and southwest England. As I said, small chance of a shower over eastern England, but certainly turning pretty damp across Northern Ireland and western Scotland. Not just the rain, but the winds also picking up. That area of low pressure bringing some gusty conditions into the west coast of Scotland by this evening time, and that rain fairly extensive through this evening over Scotland and Northern Ireland too. It will then spread into northern England during this evening, so some rain turning up in North Wales as well, and gradually spreading further south through the early hours. Much of East Anglia in the southeast though likely to stay dry, and it turns drier across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but gusty and blustery temperatures will hold up in the south. Got a warm night here, 16, 17 the low, whereas further north things turning fresher, and certainly a fresh, gusty, blustery start to Thursday. Haven't seen lively winds for a while. They'll gradually ease down through the day, but it stays windy across Shetland. Some showery rain across the south initially. That should clear through, and then many places turning sunnier by the time we get to the afternoon. Just 1 or 2 scattered showers in northern Scotland. Again, quite warm in the southeast.
Thank you, Britain, for all of you who listen to GB News Radio.
Whether you're at home or on the go, you're making us Britain's news channel and Britain's radio station.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from gbnews.com. The M80 northbound remains restricted at Junction 3 near Hornshill due to a road traffic incident causing delays. Meanwhile, on the M1 southbound near Leicester, lane closures are in place within Junction 21 because of signs and signals maintenance. 1 lane is closed while lanes 1 and 2 are diverted. Drivers are advised to allow extra time. And on the trains, there is ongoing disruption on Avanti West Coast services between Crewe and Liverpool Lime Street, alongside major delays affecting the Gatwick Express between London Victoria and Brighton. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Welcome back to PMQs Live.
We are still joined in the studio by the Labour MP for Mansfield, Steve Yem, and the Conservative MP for Wetherby and Easingwold, Alec Shelbrooke. We want to get more of your questions in. Steve Yem, Ken S. says nothing will change under Burnham. Imagine if you had done exactly what the last lot did, kept changing leaders. You're only doing it once so far, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story, and nothing changes. Your poll ratings don't improve, the programme doesn't improve because the economy's in a difficult circumstance, and none of those circumstances change just by changing the man at the top.
Well, look, I think that when I talk to voters in Mansfield, what they say to me is that they're prepared to give the new Prime Minister some time and, you know, the benefit of the doubt, and they will see how things develop. But look, on the economy, we've been thrown a real curveball by what's happened in the Middle East. In fact, inflation was heading down to the target zone. We'd had 6 interest rates, likely with more to come. Highest growth in the G7.
These are very selective statistics. On inflation, when the general election happened in July 2024, it was at 2%. After Rachel Reeves' first budget, it shot right up. That was nothing to do with the war in Iran. That was due to domestic choices, higher borrowing, and indeed higher taxes on things like hospitality. The issue of growth has also been on the floor. There's been one quarter that you refer to where it was a sort of highest growth, but every other quarter has been much below the average of the G7.
But actually, we've had consistent growth right across the Parliament, and inflation that was heading back down to the target zone. What I'm saying is that as long as you can get interest rates coming down, it looked like we were going to be able to do that through this year, and we're able to accomplish that. That makes a big difference to economic growth if we could get interest rates coming down further. So I think the economy was actually heading in the right direction.
OK. OK, so we've got a Labour politician here, we've got a Tory politician on our right. But, of course, there are other parties. And Reform UK MP Lee Anderson had a question at Prime Minister's Question Time, and we want to reflect what Reform are saying too. So let's take a listen to Lee Anderson's question.
Workers, including 2 nurses, were kicked out of their HMO, and Serco put 4 illegal migrants in this HMO. One of these illegal migrants was a Pakistani national. He went on to rape a young girl, a vulnerable young girl, on a park in Ashfield. He is now doing 14 years in prison. This was a monster allowed into this country by this awful government. But if a Prime Minister is really serious about protecting young women and girls, does he agree with me and Reform UK that every single illegal migrant coming to this country should be detained, not allowed to claim asylum, and then deported?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the fact that after net migration reached almost 1 million under the party opposite, we brought it down by 82%. On the asylum system, which he references, now asylum decisions are made at record levels, the backlog is down, removals are up 41%, and we're closing asylum hotels. They lost control of our borders. Now small boat crossings are coming down, and we deported 70,000 people with no right to be here. He likes to ask questions. He should be asking some questions of the leader of his party sitting next to him. He received £5 million in crypto from a crypto billionaire, and then privately lobbied the Bank of England on digital currencies. So did their leader carry out lobbying paid? Why did he keep his £5 million gift secret? And are they happy with their leader earning £20,000 an hour flogging gold bullion? They need to ask the questions across their benches, but they never do.
Lewis Atkinson.
Mr. Speaker.
Well, there's some spicy back and forth in the House of Commons, but of course the way that Prime Minister's question works, even though the Prime Minister asked some questions there of Nigel Farage, he wasn't allowed to stand up and respond. Let's get some response in our studio now. Alex Shelbrooke, this is occurring across the country. With the government closing asylum hotels, they're shuffling migrants around and moving them into HMOs. It's becoming more and more of a hot-button issue.
Well, it's worse than that, because in my constituency I've got RAF Linton-on-Ouse. Linton-on-Ouse is a village of 500 people. It's integrated really into that RAF site, and the government have announced, I mean, they're saying a feasibility study, but it's not a feasibility study, that they're going to put 1,500 people in there, which have come out of the hotels. So you ask the question, why are you shutting the hotels? Well, you know, they create a problem in the local community. All right, fine. But 1,500 people free to roam amongst a village of 500 people, which doesn't have a shop, is really, for want of a better description, in the middle of nowhere with poor communication, poor transport links elsewhere. How does that solve any problem whatsoever? It's often criticised the amount of money we spent sorting out Rwanda, £750 million. But it was ready to go. That £750 million had been spent to get that scheme ready to go. First act of Starmer's government was to dump it. Where's the deterrent? Where's the deterrent? Until you've got deterrents in place to stop people coming across, this situation is going to go on
so
and on.
So it's your contention that instead of putting migrants in former army camps, like in the village in your constituency, or in HMOs, like we were hearing in Ashfield, instead these people could have all been sent to Rwanda?
Well, it's the deterrent process, isn't it? Because you had the deal with Albania where we did that deal and 90% drop in Albanians coming across.
It was a safe country. Albania was a safe country.
And you know, there's a lot of arguments to and fro, and that's why the 750 million quid was spent sorting out Rwanda. But if you were to ask your listeners, your viewers, I suspect most of them would assume that military camps are secure sites.
Okay.
And they're not.
OK, so Keir Starmer's response to Lee Anderson was, look, I'm getting it under control, I'm proud of what we're doing, we're tackling the problem. Yet, you hear what Alex Shelbrooke just said, you hear the particular example that Lee Anderson used, and you think, well, this doesn't sound like a system under control, Steve Yem.
Well, look, we inherited a system totally out of control. We had Conservative ministers bragging about the amount of additional hotels that they'd be able to bring online to house migrants.
Robert Jenrick, let's be clear about that. It was Robert Jenrick.
And he was a former Conservative minister.
He seems to have had a change in history.
Who did that. And, Conservative government who presided over that. And look, I think my next-door neighbour in Ashfield has a cheek. He sat on those Conservative benches when both legal migration and illegal border crossings were out of control. We are getting that back under control.
But what do you say to what Lee Anderson's point was, which was there was a girl in his constituency that was raped by someone who was brought to his constituency and housed at the expense of the taxpayer by this government?
And look, anyone who commits such an awful crime deserves to feel the full force of the law, and if they're found guilty and they're a foreign national, I believe that they should be deported. And, of course, we've massively increased the number of foreign national offenders that we're deporting, over 10,000 since we came into power 2 years ago. I think it is really important that we reduce the number of people crossing illegally. We've reduced that by over 40% this year compared to last year, so we're making progress. We've published a bill yesterday with a whole raft of changes to the asylum system, which we believe will reduce pull factors. I think there is no silver bullet to solve these problems. Rwanda certainly was not a silver bullet at all. And I think, when we think about all of the measures that we're taking together, this is a serious attempt to reduce both people coming to the UK to work on visas. We've been very successful in doing that, but we're cutting illegal crossings as well. So, look, this is a difficult problem, but I believe the government's gripping this and it's beginning to show success.
And Alex Shelbrooke, Lee Anderson just made a very simple call, which just sounds like common sense: detain and deport. We've got about 50 seconds left, but why was that so hard to achieve under this law and under your law?
Well, of course, where are the deterrents and the way it's coming across? I mean, all the money's gone into France. Now people are coming from Belgium. It's really hard, but detain and get rid of is pretty much the policy we want as well.
And it might have been hard, but under your watch, it was all going up. Under our watch, it's all going
just
down.
To be fair, what you've deported was because of what Rishi Sunak put in place. It's always a twist of the figure, that. All those deportations came from what we left you.
And it's not just deportations, it's people entering the country illegally that are also falling. So that hard problem...
Well, we could talk about this for a very long time. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the programme, but thank you both for being here with us. You've been watching and listening to PMQs Live with Gloria De Pirio and me. Stay tuned for Good Afternoon Britain. Another 2 hours of me. Enjoy.
And
expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Box Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A fine day by and large today. There will be some wet weather coming into western Scotland, the west of Northern Ireland later on. Temperatures about average for most places, but quite warm across the southeast. High pressure edging in from the south, but low pressure also pushing in across the north, and that will bring the rain, just patchy rain initially, spreading its way into Northern Ireland, then into the west coast of Scotland. One or two showers possible ahead of that, particularly across Scotland. The odd shower elsewhere is just about possible, especially for East Anglia, but most of England and Wales dry with a mixture of cloudy skies and some sunshine. And when the sun's out, temperatures getting up to 25, 26 across the southeast. Otherwise, fairly close to average for the time of year. There's the rain edging its way in further north, but generally staying fine. A pretty good evening. The cloud melting away further this evening over South Wales and southwest England. As I said, small chance of a shower over eastern England, but certainly turning pretty damp across Northern Ireland and western Scotland. Not just the rain, but the winds also picking up. That area of low pressure bringing some gusty conditions into the west coast of Scotland by this evening time. And that rain fairly extensive through this evening over Scotland and Northern Ireland too. It will then